Sarah wasn't born to the West, but the West was born in her. She arrived in the Dakota Territory some years back, a wisp of a thing according to some of the old-timers, but with a spirit as fiery as a prairie sunset. She'd come seeking a new life, a life far from the stifling parlors and expectations of the East. What she found was a land of harsh beauty, of unforgiving weather, and of people as tough as the scrub oak that clung to the hillsides. Her small cabin sat on the very edge of the Sioux reservation, a place where the rolling grasslands met the whispering cottonwoods along the riverbank. She wasn't exactly welcomed with open arms, but neither was she driven away. The Sioux watched her, assessing her worth, her intentions. They saw her mend fences with calloused hands, tend garden with patience, and treat the land with respect. They saw her trade fairly and speak honestly. She learned a smattering of their language, enough to exchange greetings and simple necessities. She respected their ways, their traditions, even if she didn't fully understand them. Some of the white settlers whispered behind her back, calling her a squaw lover and worse. But Sarah paid them no mind. She had her own code, her own compass, and she followed it true. She lived a solitary life, but not a lonely one. The vastness of the plains, the soaring hawks, the rustling grasses, these were her companions. She was an outsider, yes, but she was also a part of this land, woven into its fabric like a thread of gold in a tapestry of green and brown. She was Sarah, and she was making her own way, on her own terms, in a world that didn't always make it easy for a woman alone. Her nearest neighbor was a day's ride away, but the Sioux village wasn't much further, although she rarely ventured there. She existed in the space between two worlds, belonging fully to neither, yet touched by both. The land itself was a character in Sarah's story, as alive and unpredictable as any person. Imagine a canvas stretched wider than the eye could see, painted with hues of gold and amber, fading into the deep blues and purples of the distant mountains. This was the Dakota Territory in the late 1800s, a place of breathtaking beauty and sudden, brutal violence, where fortunes were made and lost in the blink of an eye. The summers were scorchers, the sun beating down on the parched earth until it cracked and groaned. Dust devils danced across the plains, swirling like restless spirits. But then, just as suddenly, the skies would open up, unleashing torrential downpours that transformed the dry riverbeds into raging torrents. The river that snaked its way through the valley was normally a gentle, meandering stream, barely more than a trickle in the dry season. But when the rains came, it became a monster, a churning, frothing beast that devoured everything in its path. The Sioux called it Wakpesika, the Bad River, and they knew to respect its power. The land was unforgiving. Winters brought blizzards that howled for days, burying everything under a thick blanket of snow. Spring was a brief respite, a burst of wildflowers and new life before the cycle began again. It was a place where survival depended on resilience, on knowing how to read the signs, on understanding the rhythms of nature. The very air hummed with a wild energy, a sense of untamed freedom. It was a land that demanded respect, a land that tested your limits, a land that could break you or make you stronger than you ever thought possible. And it was this land, with all its beauty and its danger, that Sarah had chosen as her home. She knew the risks, she understood the challenges, but she wouldn't have it any other way. The freedom she found here was worth more than all the comforts and safety she had left behind. This was her place, her story, etched against the vast, unending sky. The morning had dawned clear and bright, a deceptive serenity hanging in the air. Sarah, after tending to her small vegetable garden, paused to wipe the sweat from her brow, glancing at the cloudless sky. The air felt heavy, thick with humidity, a subtle warning that only a seasoned plains dweller would recognize. She'd seen this before. The clear skies were often a prelude to something fierce. By midday, the change was undeniable. A dark smudge appeared on the western horizon, growing larger and more ominous with each passing minute. The wind picked up, swirling dust and leaves into a frenzy. The birds, sensing the impending storm, fell silent, seeking shelter in the thickets. Sarah hurried to secure her cabin, battening down the shutters and bringing in anything that might be swept away by the wind. She knew what was coming: a Dakota thunderstorm, a force of nature unleashed. The temperature dropped suddenly, a chill wind whipping across the plains. Then, the first rumble of thunder echoed across the sky, a deep, guttural growl that promised more to come. Lightning flashed, illuminating the landscape in stark, momentary brilliance. The first fat raindrops began to fall, splattering on the dry earth, quickly turning the dust to mud. Within minutes, the downpour was torrential, a blinding deluge that obscured everything. The wind howled like a banshee, shaking the small cabin to its foundations. The river, Wakpesika, began to rise, its waters turning a muddy brown as it churned and swelled. The storm had arrived, unleashing its fury upon the land. Sarah knew she had to wait it out, hoping her little cabin could withstand the onslaught. But she also knew that the real danger lay not just in the wind and rain, but in the rising waters of the Bad River. Peering through the rain-streaked window, Sarah anxiously watched the river. It was rising at an alarming rate, the muddy water now reaching the base of the cottonwood trees that lined its banks. Debris, branches, tumbleweeds, even the occasional unfortunate animal, swirled past in the raging current. Suddenly, through a break in the downpour, she saw them. Two small figures near the riverbank, seemingly oblivious to the danger. They were boys, Sioux boys. She recognized them as Little Hawk and Swift Arrow, the younger brothers of Waxtall. They were playing near a cluster of rocks, seemingly fascinated by the rising water. Sarah's heart leaped into her throat. They were too close, far too close. The river was already overflowing its banks, and the ground around them was becoming saturated. One wrong step, and they'd be swept away. She knew she had to do something, and she had to do it fast. She threw open the cabin door, the wind and rain hitting her full force. She shielded her eyes, trying to get a better look at the boys. They were still there, still playing, unaware of the imminent danger. Yelling would be useless. The wind would carry her voice away. She had to reach them, had to get them to safety before it was too late. Without a second thought, she plunged into the storm, battling her way towards the river, her boots sinking into the muddy ground. The wind howled in her ears, and the rain stung her face, but she kept her eyes fixed on the two small figures near the churning water. The rescue had begun. She was halfway to the river when disaster struck. A section of the bank, undermined by the relentless current, crumbled beneath the boy's feet. Little Hawk, the younger of the two, lost his footing and tumbled into the churning water. Swift Arrow, a little older and more sure-footed, reached out to grab him, but the force of the current was too strong. He, too, was pulled into the river. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. The boys were struggling, their small bodies tossed about like rag dolls in the raging torrent. She could see the fear in their eyes, the desperate fight for survival. The river was pulling them downstream, away from the bank, towards the deeper, more treacherous waters. She pushed herself harder, her legs burning, her lungs aching. The muddy ground made each step a struggle, but she couldn't give up. She was their only hope. She had to reach them, had to pull them from the clutches of the Bad River before it was too late. The sight of the boys disappearing beneath the surface, then reappearing gasping for air, spurred her on. She could hear their cries for help, faint and desperate against the roar of the storm. Finally, she reached the riverbank, the water swirling around her ankles. The current was even stronger than she had anticipated, pulling at her legs, threatening to sweep her away as well. She had to be careful, had to stay focused. The lives of two young boys depended on her. She scanned the churning water, trying to locate them, her heart pounding in her chest. Where were they? Spotting a flash of color in the churning water, she saw Little Hawk struggling nearby, closer to the bank than his brother. Without hesitation, Sarah plunged into the icy water, the force of the current immediately threatening to pull her under. She fought against it, her arms working furiously, her eyes fixed on the boy. The water was shockingly cold, stealing her breath and numbing her limbs. She could barely see through the rain and the spray, but she kept pushing forward, driven by a primal instinct to save the child. Reaching Little Hawk was like trying to grab a slippery fish. He was terrified, flailing his arms and legs, making it difficult for her to get a hold of him. "Little Hawk, stop! Grab onto me!" she yelled, her voice barely audible above the roar of the storm and the river. Finally, she managed to reach him, grabbing him firmly around the waist. He clung to her like a limpet, his small body trembling with cold and fear. Turning back towards the bank was even harder. The current was relentless, pulling them both downstream. Sarah dug her heels into the muddy bottom, using every ounce of strength to inch her way back to safety. It was a slow, agonizing struggle, but she refused to give up. Little Hawk's life depended on it. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she reached the bank, collapsing onto the muddy ground, gasping for air. Little Hawk coughed and sputtered, but he was alive. Safe. But there was no time to rest. Swift Arrow was still out there. Leaving Little Hawk shivering on the bank, wrapped in her coat, Sarah turned her attention back to the river. Swift Arrow was further downstream now, closer to a dangerous tangle of fallen trees. The current was even stronger in that section, swirling around the submerged branches, creating a deadly trap. She knew she was running out of time. The cold was starting to take its toll. Her muscles were aching, and her energy was waning. But she couldn't give up. She had to save Swift Arrow, even if it meant risking her own life. Taking a deep breath, she plunged back into the icy water, pushing off from the bank with all her remaining strength. This time, she aimed further downstream, trying to intercept Swift Arrow before he reached the fallen trees. The current was relentless, pulling her sideways, making it difficult to swim in a straight line. She focused on her breathing, trying to conserve her energy. She kicked her legs, stroking her arms, pushing through the water, her eyes fixed on the small figure struggling in the distance. She could see him now, his face pale with fear, his arms flailing desperately. "Swift Arrow, I'm coming," she yelled, her voice barely a whisper against the roar of the storm. She swam harder, pushing herself beyond her limits, driven by a desperate need to reach him. The fallen trees loomed closer, a menacing tangle of branches and swirling water. She had to reach him now, before it was too late. The rescue had to happen now. She pushed forward, her body screaming in protest, her mind focused on one thing: saving the boy. The icy water was numbing her limbs, stealing her strength, but she couldn't give up. She was so close now, so close. Just a little further, just a little more. Just as Swift Arrow was about to be swept into the treacherous tangle of trees, Sarah reached him. She grabbed him by the arm, pulling him towards her with a surge of adrenaline. He was heavier than Little Hawk, and the current was even stronger here, making it almost impossible to hold on to him. "Hold on tight," she gasped, her voice strained with effort. Swift Arrow, his eyes wide with terror, clung to her with all his might. Together, they fought against the relentless pull of the river, inching their way towards the bank. The submerged branches snagged at their clothes, threatening to pull them under. Sarah had to think fast. She couldn't fight the current head-on. She had to use its force to her advantage. She angled her body, using the momentum of the water to push them towards a slightly shallower section of the bank. It was a desperate gamble, but it worked. Slowly, painstakingly, they made their way towards safety, dodging the submerged branches, fighting against the swirling current. Each stroke was an agony, each breath a struggle, but they kept going, driven by a shared will to survive. Finally, with one last surge of effort, Sarah pulled Swift Arrow onto the bank, collapsing beside him, exhausted and shivering. They lay there for a moment, catching their breath, the rain washing over them, the thunder still rumbling in the distance. They were safe. They were alive. Sarah looked at Swift Arrow, his face pale and streaked with mud. He looked back at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. She had done it. She had saved them both. Now, to get them back to the cabin. Getting back to the cabin was another ordeal. The storm was still raging, and the muddy ground was slick and treacherous. Sarah, with Little Hawk clinging to her hand and Swift Arrow close behind, struggled to make their way back. Every step was an effort, every breath a reminder of how close they had come to disaster. The wind whipped at them, the rain stung their faces, and the cold seeped into their bones. They stumbled and slipped, but they kept going, driven by the need for warmth and shelter. Little Hawk was shivering uncontrollably, and Swift Arrow's teeth were chattering. Sarah knew they had to get them inside quickly before hypothermia set in. Finally, they reached the cabin, collapsing inside with a collective sigh of relief. Sarah quickly shut the door, shutting out the storm and the cold. The interior of the cabin was dim and damp, but it was a haven compared to the raging storm outside. She quickly got a fire going in the hearth, the flames flickering and casting a warm glow around the room. She stripped off their wet clothes, wrapping them in warm blankets. She rummaged through her meager supplies, finding some dried meat and some hardtack biscuits. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. She fed the boys, watching as they devoured the food, their eyes shining with gratitude. She knew she had done the right thing, risking her own life to save them. They were safe now, warm and dry, thanks to her. But she also knew that this was just the beginning. The storm would eventually pass, but the events of this day would forever change her relationship with the Sioux. Something had shifted, something had changed. The storm finally began to subside as night fell, the wind dying down and the rain easing to a drizzle. The river, though still swollen, had begun to recede. Sarah sat by the fire, watching the boys as they slept soundly, wrapped in blankets. Their faces were peaceful now, the fear and trauma of the day momentarily forgotten. As the fire crackled and popped, she thought about what had happened. She hadn't hesitated, hadn't thought about the danger. She had simply acted. It was as if something inside her had taken over, a primal instinct to protect those in need. She knew that her actions would have consequences, that her life would never be the same. The Sioux were a proud and honorable people, and they would not forget what she had done. She wondered what they would do, how they would react. Would they accept her as one of their own, or would she forever remain an outsider? As the night wore on, Sarah drifted off to sleep, lulled by the warmth of the fire and the rhythmic sound of the rain. She dreamt of raging rivers and terrified faces, of courage and sacrifice. She dreamt of a new beginning, a new understanding, a new place within the world. When she awoke the next morning, the storm had passed, and the sun was shining brightly. The world was washed clean, sparkling with renewed life. The river was still high, but it was no longer a raging torrent. It was as if the land itself was breathing a sigh of relief. And then she heard it, the sound of approaching horses. They had come. As Sarah stepped outside, she saw a group of Sioux warriors approaching, led by Waxtall, his face stoic and unreadable. Little Hawk and Swift Arrow ran to their brother, embracing him tightly. Waxtall nodded to them, then turned his gaze to Sarah, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something else she couldn't quite decipher. The warriors dismounted, their faces etched with respect. They stood silently, watching Sarah, waiting for Waxtall to speak. He approached her slowly, his moccasins making no sound on the damp earth. "You saved my brothers," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "They have told us of your courage, your strength." Sarah nodded, unsure of what to say. "They were in danger," she replied simply. "Anyone would have done the same." Waxtall shook his head. "Not everyone," he said. "Not everyone would risk their life for others, especially for those not of their own blood." He paused, then continued. "Word of your bravery has spread quickly through the village. The people are grateful. They wish to honor you." Sarah felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of humility and pride. She had never sought recognition, had never expected anything in return for her actions. But to be honored by the Sioux, to be accepted by them, would mean more to her than words could express. "I am honored," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "But I did only what I thought was right." Waxtall smiled, a rare and precious sight. "We know," he said, "and that is why we honor you." He then gestured to one of the warriors, who stepped forward, carrying a large, intricately decorated object. Sarah watched, her heart pounding in her chest, wondering what was about to happen. This was the moment of truth. The warrior approached Sarah, carefully holding out a Lakota star quilt. It was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, each stitch a testament to the skill and dedication of the woman who had made it. The quilt was made of small, colorful squares of fabric, arranged in a complex pattern that formed a large, 8-pointed star. Sarah gasped, recognizing the significance of the gift. Star quilts were not given lightly. They were symbols of honor, of protection, of guidance. They were given to those who had shown great bravery, to those who had earned the respect of the tribe. Waxtall stepped forward, his eyes filled with emotion. "This quilt," he said, "was made by my mother before she passed on to the spirit world. It is a symbol of all that we hold sacred. It is a gift of great honor." He paused, then continued, "We know that you are not Sioux. We know that you are not of our blood. But you have shown us that you have a heart as brave as any warrior. You have risked your life to save our children. For that, we are eternally grateful." He looked at Sarah, his gaze piercing and sincere. "We wish to give you a name that will be whispered with respect among our people, a name that will honor your courage and your compassion." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. A name? To be given a name by the Sioux, to be accepted into their culture in such a profound way, was beyond anything she could have imagined. She waited, her breath held captive in her lungs, wondering what name they would bestow upon her. This was more than just an honor. It was a transformation. Waxtall paused, his gaze sweeping over the faces of his warriors, then back to Sarah. "Because you are not Sioux," he said, "we cannot give you a traditional tribal name. Those names are earned through specific deeds, through a lifetime of service to the tribe. They are sacred and reserved for our own people." Sarah nodded, understanding. She knew that she could never truly be one of them, that she would always be an outsider in some ways. But she also knew that she had earned their respect, that she had proven her worth. However, Waxtall continued, his voice softening, "We can give you a name that reflects what you did, a name that speaks to your spirit, a name that will remind us always of your courage and your compassion." He took a deep breath, then spoke the words that would forever change her life. "From this day forward," he said, his voice ringing with authority, "you will be known as she who walks with courage." A murmur of approval rippled through the warriors. Little Hawk and Swift Arrow looked at Sarah with admiration in their eyes. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat, tears welling up in her eyes. "She who walks with courage," she repeated softly, testing the words on her tongue. It was beautiful, powerful, perfect. It was more than just a name. It was an affirmation of her spirit, a recognition of her worth. She looked at Waxtall, her heart overflowing with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I am honored." Waxtall smiled. "The honor is ours," he said. "You have shown us the true meaning of courage. You have shown us the true meaning of compassion. You are now one of us, in spirit if not in blood." He stepped forward and draped the star quilt over her shoulders, its warmth enveloping her like a loving embrace. From that day forward, Sarah was no longer just an outsider living on the edge of the reservation. She was she who walks with courage, a valued and respected member of the Sioux community. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over the land. The warriors mounted their horses, preparing to return to the village. Little Hawk and Swift Arrow lingered for a moment, their eyes filled with gratitude. Little Hawk ran to Sarah and hugged her legs tightly. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You saved my life." Swift Arrow stepped forward and offered Sarah a small, intricately carved wooden bird. "For you," he said, his eyes shining with sincerity. "To remember us." Sarah accepted the gift, her heart overflowing with emotion. She watched as the warriors rode away, their figures silhouetted against the horizon. As they disappeared from sight, she knew that her life had been forever changed. She turned back to her cabin, the star quilt still draped over her shoulders. She could feel its warmth, its protection, its guidance. She could feel the weight of the honor that had been bestowed upon her. She entered the cabin, her eyes scanning the familiar surroundings. Everything looked the same, but she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. She was no longer just Sarah, the solitary woman living on the edge of the reservation. She was She Who Walks with Courage, a name that would forever connect her to the Sioux people. She touched the small wooden bird, her fingers tracing its delicate carvings. It was a symbol of the bond that had been forged between her and the two young boys, a symbol of the courage and compassion that had brought them together. She walked to the window and gazed out at the vast expanse of the plains. The land was beautiful, wild, and unforgiving. It was a land that demanded respect, a land that tested your limits. And it was a land that she now called home. She Who Walks with Courage. Time passed. Sarah, now known as She Who Walks with Courage, continued to live in her cabin on the edge of the reservation, but her life was no longer solitary. The Sioux people welcomed her into their community, sharing their stories, their traditions, their lives. She learned more of their language, their customs, their beliefs. She became a friend, a confidant, a trusted member of the tribe. Little Hawk and Swift Arrow often visited her, bringing her gifts of wildflowers and berries. They would sit by the fire, listening to her stories of the East, stories of a world they could only imagine. She, in turn, learned from them, learning about the ways of the plains, the secrets of the animals, the wisdom of the elders. Waxtall became a frequent visitor as well, seeking her counsel on matters of importance to the tribe. He respected her wisdom, her honesty, her courage. He saw in her a strength that transcended race and culture, a strength that was rooted in the human spirit. The star quilt became a cherished possession, a constant reminder of the honor that had been bestowed upon her. She hung it on the wall of her cabin, where its colors brightened the room and its warmth filled her heart. It was a symbol of her connection to the Sioux people, a symbol of her transformation from an outsider to an insider. And as the years passed, She Who Walks with Courage became a legend among the Sioux, a testament to the power of courage, the power of compassion, the power of the human spirit to overcome all obstacles. Her story was told and retold, inspiring generations to come. She was Sarah no more. She was a legend. Years turned into decades. The Dakota territory changed, the railroads came, the towns grew, and the old ways began to fade. But one thing remained constant: the respect and admiration that the Sioux people held for She Who Walks with Courage. Her name was whispered in hushed tones around campfires, her story told and retold, each telling adding new layers of meaning and significance. She became a symbol of hope, a symbol of courage, a symbol of the enduring power of the human spirit. Even as the white settlers encroached further and further onto their land, the Sioux never forgot the woman who had risked her life to save their children. They saw in her a kindred spirit, a soul who understood the importance of compassion and the value of human life. Sarah, or rather, She Who Walks with Courage, continued to live her life with grace and dignity, always ready to lend a helping hand, always ready to offer a word of encouragement. She became a bridge between two worlds, a testament to the possibility of understanding and respect between different cultures. And when she finally passed on to the spirit world, she was mourned by both the white settlers and the Sioux people. Her legacy lived on, not just in the stories that were told about her, but in the lives that she had touched, in the hearts that she had inspired. She Who Walks with Courage. The name echoed through the generations, a reminder that even the smallest act of kindness can have a profound and lasting impact on the world. A true legend of the West. The wind whispered across the plains, carrying with it the stories of the past, the hopes for the future. She Who Walks with Courage stood tall, her face etched with the wisdom of experience, her eyes shining with the light of compassion. She had seen much in her long life, had witnessed the changing of the seasons, the ebb and flow of human relationships, the relentless march of progress. She had seen the best and the worst of humanity, had experienced both joy and sorrow, triumph and tragedy. But through it all, she had never lost her faith in the goodness of the human heart, her belief in the power of courage, her commitment to making the world a better place. She had lived her life with integrity and purpose, had touched countless lives, had left an indelible mark on the hearts of all who knew her. And now, as she stood on the threshold of eternity, she felt a sense of peace and contentment. She knew that she had lived a good life, that she had made a difference, that she had earned her place in the history of the West. She looked out at the vast expanse of the plains, the land that she had come to love, the land that had shaped her into the woman she had become. She breathed in the fresh, clean air, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face, the wind in her hair. And as she closed her eyes for the last time, she whispered a prayer of gratitude, a prayer of hope, a prayer for the future. May the spirit of courage continue to guide us, she prayed. May the spirit of compassion continue to inspire us. May we all walk with courage, always. The legend of She Who Walks with Courage lives on. The stories of She Who Walks with Courage are still told today, passed down from generation to generation among the Sioux people. They tell of a woman who was not born to their tribe, but who became one of their own through her courage, her compassion, and her unwavering spirit. They tell of a woman who defied expectations, who broke down barriers, who showed the world that love and understanding can conquer all. They tell of a woman who became a legend, a symbol of hope, a beacon of light in a world often shrouded in darkness. And as the wind whispers across the plains, carrying with it the echoes of the past, the name of She Who Walks with Courage will continue to inspire us all to be better, to be kinder, to be more courageous. For in the end, it is not our blood that defines us, but our actions. It is not our origin that matters, but our destination. It is not our differences that divide us, but our shared humanity that unites us. And so, let us all strive to walk with courage, to walk with compassion, to walk with love in our hearts. Let us all strive to be worthy of the legacy of She Who Walks with Courage, a true legend of the West, a true testament to the power of the human spirit. Her story, a timeless reminder that courage knows no boundaries, compassion transcends all differences, and that even an outsider can become a legend by walking the path of bravery and love. The end.